What if I told you that Venus hides a secret so disturbing that NASA itself did everything to silence any evidence? Would you believe it? Or are you already used to hearing controlled versions of reality about space? Why, among so many planets, in the solar system was the one closest to Earth practically abandoned by space agencies? And more. Why are the files of the missions that reached their censored, edited, or simply disappeared from official records? For decades, NASA launched expeditions, carried out studies, and received data from probes that reached Venus. But, mysteriously, the planet was no longer explored. And when you start to investigate public documents, there are always hidden parts, omitted sections, images with low resolution or blurred areas. This raises a dangerous question. What exactly don't you want us to see? What discovery on Venus is so shocking, so out of the ordinary, that it simply had to be buried? We are not talking about vague assumptions or unsubstantiated theories. There are real records, leaked documents, and statements from former NASA employees that suggest there is much more to Venus than toxic gases and extreme temperatures. Have you ever wondered why scientists suddenly stopped being interested in this planet, even after obtaining promising data from the first missions? Is it a coincidence, or part of something bigger? Perhaps NASA's biggest mistake was letting slip certain details that can no longer be hidden today. Small fragments of truth that have infiltrated the internet in unindexed files, in forgotten forums, and that together form a disturbing image. The planet Venus may not just be an uninhabitable hell, as they would have us believe. What if I show you signs that it was once inhabited, or that it still retains traces of an intelligent presence? Now imagine the global impact this would cause, and understand the reason for the silence. Because in this video, you won't just hear another story. You will follow an investigation that could completely change what you think about NASA, about Venus, and perhaps about the whole truth that they never wanted you to know. So stay with me until the end, because what you're going to see here isn't in science books, much less in official NASA communications. What I'm going to reveal now is part of a puzzle that has been assembled silently, away from the public eye, by independent researchers, informants, and leaks that the mainstream media insists on ignoring. And if you think this is all just another conspiracy theory, I challenge you to watch this video until the end, and try to leave it with the same vision you entered. What's behind NASA's decisions not to return to Venus? Why did so much data collected about the planet simply disappear from public archives? What really happened to the images captured by the probes that arrived there? You'll notice that the deeper we dig, the more questions arise, and the fewer official answers appear. And that, in itself, is a powerful indication that something is being deliberately hidden. You have the right to know what is being done with the public money invested in these missions. You have the right to question, to investigate, because as long as the truth is hidden behind fancy words and scientific graphs, no one will truly be free to understand what is happening beyond our atmosphere. And that's exactly why channels like this exist, to reveal what's between the lines, what's been erased, distorted, or buried. If you also feel that something doesn't add up, that there is a greater truth being hidden from humanity, leave a like now and subscribe to the channel. This isn't just a simple gesture. It's a way to strengthen this collective investigation, to break the censorship bubble and help more people question themselves. With each click, this video goes further. With each new subscriber, we form a stronger network of truth seekers. What comes next could completely change the way you see the universe and NASA's role in it all. Get ready, because now we're going to enter what could be one of the greatest space secrets ever hidden from humanity. But why, after all, do we stop looking at Venus? We are talking about the closest planet to Earth, our closest neighbor in the solar system, a sphere surrounded by a dense layer of clouds that completely hides its surface. Still, Despite its proximity and so many unanswered questions, Venus was left aside, ignored, forgotten, while Mars received dozens of probes. Robots, live broadcasts, and billions of dollars in investments. Venus was placed in the background. But why? This is the question that echoes in many communities of independent researchers, space enthusiasts, and students of unexplained phenomena. The planet that should be in the spotlight has become almost taboo. And when we look at the timeline, something catches our attention. Right after a series of missions in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which brought curious data and enigmatic images, interest suddenly disappeared. Space agencies simply looked away. No concrete effort, no new attempt to deepen. Just silence. Venus has been called Earth's twin. Its mass, its density, and even its initial composition indicate that, at some point in cosmic history, it may have been a planet as fertile as ours. There is evidence to suggest that billions of years ago, it had liquid water, livable temperatures, and possibly a breathable atmosphere. But today, all that remains is a scorching hell, where atmospheric pressure would crush any terrestrial life form in seconds. This raises an uncomfortable question. Could what happened to Venus happen to us? The comparison between the two planets is inevitable, and perhaps it is precisely this comparison that bothers so much. If Venus was once like Earth, what exactly caused its fall? And what did NASA find there that made them retreat? There are incomplete files, images that were never released, and internal reports with entire sections redacted. Some old mission transmissions indicate unexplained glitches. Technical problems, perhaps, maybe not. Some of these missions captured formations that were too symmetrical to be natural. Elevations in geometric patterns, shadows in places where there should be no relief, and changes in the ground recorded in very short time intervals. Analyses carried out by experts outside the major centers of official science suggest that something or someone has already interfered with that surface. Whether it is true or not, no one can say for sure. But the fact that these images quickly disappeared from public platforms and were replaced by blurry or incomplete versions says a lot. And then a bold hypothesis emerges. What if Venus isn't just a dead planet? What if there is still some kind of activity, even if it is not biological, but technological or artificial, hidden beneath its thick clouds? There are thermal records that show variations in heat in specific regions of the surface. Data were mentioned at scientific conferences but never received due attention. They were, once again, ignored. It's hard to miss the pattern. When something falls outside the controlled narrative, it is discredited, ridiculed, or forgotten. And this pattern is repeated so many times that it has become predictable. There are those who say that this lack of information is, in fact, the presence of censorship. Not explicit censorship, but subtle, strategic, a conscious choice not to disclose what could generate mass questions. Mars, with all its marketing, has become the symbol of futuristic hope. Colonization, survival, escape from Earth. All of this sounds more inspiring than admitting that the nearest planet could be a grim warning. Venus does not fit into the optimistic discourse of space agencies. It does not represent a future. He represents a dangerous past, a warning, a reflection, and perhaps for this reason, NASA preferred to remain silent. Not because there is nothing to investigate, but because there is too much. Because when you honestly investigate Venus, the questions become bigger than the answers, and the answers can be devastating. There are experts who suggest that among the agency's most restricted internal documents are records of anomalous electromagnetic emissions detected in specific regions of the planet. Emissions that do not match simple volcanic activity, but that resemble communication patterns. Communication from whom? With whom? This possibility is uncomfortable. It opens up space for everything that major scientific centers avoid discussing openly: the existence of intelligent life beyond Earth, and even more, the possibility that this intelligence has already left traces, or is still active, in the celestial bodies around us. What if Venus is one of those places? What is most intriguing is that, behind the scenes, there are movements happening. International agencies have announced plans to send new probes to the planet. Missions like Da Vinci Plus and Veritas have been announced with promises to explore the atmosphere and precisely map the surface. But why now? Why, after so many years of silence, does NASA turn its eyes to Venus again? Could it be a coincidence? Or are we finally reaching a point where certain truths can no longer be hidden? What if everything that was ignored in the past is about to come to light? Comment, hear what you think, right? They are returning to Venus if you believe there is something big going on behind the scenes. Or write, I want to know the truth if you feel like something much bigger is being hidden from us all. Few people know, but Venus has been the site of some of the most daring missions in the history of space exploration. Before being forgotten by public opinion, this planet was obsessively observed by agencies such as NASA and the former USSR. And that's where the story starts to take a curious turn. Because the more Venus was studied, the more anomalies emerged. And the more anomalies were recorded, the faster the data disappeared. Coincidence? Hard to believe. There's something about this narrative that just doesn't add up. The Soviet Union's Venera series of missions, for example, is one of the darkest chapters in this story. The USSR was the only nation to manage to land equipment on Venus and send back images of the surface before it was completely destroyed by the crushing pressure and infernal heat. The images obtained, at least those that were released, showed a desolate, rocky landscape shrouded in dense fog. But what few know is that, among the original files, there were records with strange flaws. Distorted images, inexplicable shadows, geometric shapes too symmetrical to be natural. These images disappeared over time. Officially, it is said that they were corrupted or that the initial interpretation was misguided. But is it really? Missions such as Mariner 10 and Pioneer Venus also reported non-standard data. Mariner 10, before dedicating itself to Mercury, flew over Venus and recorded unusual radio emissions. Frequencies that, to this day, have no clear explanation. Pioneer Venus, in turn, detected heat zones with anomalous behavior, variations that appeared and disappeared in fixed areas, as if there were an unknown energy source operating beneath the crust. Once again, reports of these findings were quickly filed. The official interpretations: sensor failures, background noise, inaccurate data due to atmospheric interference. Always the same generic answer to questions that required in-depth investigation. And it doesn't stop there. There are records of a NASA mission that does not even appear in the official lists. An experimental probe launched between 1989 and 1991, whose destination would have been Venus. Some documents suggest that it transmitted data for a few hours before completely disappearing from the system. No official statement was issued. No technical report released. The name of the mission: it was never mentioned. Just an internal reference code that some researchers found in documents obtained via the Access to Information Law. What did this probe capture? Nobody knows. Or maybe they don't want us to know. Another fact that raises suspicion is the way in which missions that actually landed on Venus failed abruptly, as if some unknown force was operating there. Robust equipment, prepared to withstand extreme conditions, deteriorated in record time. Communication signals suddenly ceased. Technical reports speak of instant thermal overload. But interestingly, in ground tests, the equipment withstood much more severe simulations. It's like there's something there, something directly interfering with the instruments. advanced technology, artificial electromagnetic field, or who knows, traces of an ancient civilization that didn't want to be discovered. The mystery deepens. When we look at image management, many of the photos taken by the first probes, both Soviet and American, are now found in edited versions, with exaggerated compression or with dark bands that cover parts of the surface. This, of course, is attributed to transmission errors. But researchers who obtained older copies of these files say that in previous versions, these areas were not blocked. It was an edit made later. A censorship. There is even an image of Venera 13 circulating on forums and alternative research sites that shows what appears to be a metallic object, half buried in the ground. Officially, NASA and the scientific community dismissed it as a visual artifact or debris from the probe itself. But space imaging experts who analyzed the photos say the object's brightness, shape, and reflection do not match any Venera piece. What's more, that detail simply disappeared in the official version of the image. It is as if they had deliberately erased what did not make sense within the traditional scientific model. In 2012, former NASA technical consultant who worked on planetary image analysis stated in an interview that many records from Venus never reached the public. According to him, there was an informal internal policy of discarding or permanently archiving any data that raised more questions than answers. He did not name names, but suggested there was a conscious effort to prevent certain information from leaking out. The interview was taken down a few days later. The channel that published the video received a sensitive content notification and was penalized for spreading misinformation. These cases are not isolated. They are part of a pattern that is repeated at different moments in the history of space exploration. Data collected, anomalies identified, internal reactions of surprise, public silence, and then oblivion. This is what many call a containment protocol, a strategy to avoid panic, questioning, or simply breaking the current paradigm about what is or is not acceptable as scientific truth. And when we talk about Venus, the situation becomes even more sensitive, because if there really was some kind of technological activity there, if signs of an ancient civilization were detected, or if the planet still contains forms of energy that we don't understand, then we are facing one of the biggest cover-ups in modern history. This would not just be a scientific question, it would be a civilizational clash. And whoever controls this information also controls the narrative of what is possible, what is allowed to be believed, and what will be dismissed as fantasy. Can you feel the gravity of it all? Can you understand how much we have been deprived of knowing? If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments. They erase the truth. If you believe these missions hide more than they reveal, or write Venus was silenced. If you think the discoveries were deliberately buried to keep humanity ignorant after so many silenced missions. Mysteriously missing data and altered images, the inevitable question hits hard. What after all was really found on Venus? What caused entire missions to be abandoned? What caused this sudden retreat, this profound silence on the part of large space agencies like NASA? The answer, even if still fragmented, lies between the lines. It's in the small leaks, in the forgotten speeches, in the poorly censored documents that escaped total control. And when you start to put this puzzle together, what forms before your eyes is something that completely deviates from the official narrative. There are records of geometric formations on Venus that simply do not make sense within the natural geological pattern. The images captured by Soviet probes, and some filtered by NASA, show reliefs that are too straight, angles that are too perfect, structures that resemble walls, platforms, and even symmetrical entrances on surfaces that, theoretically, should be chaotic due to extreme volcanic activity. In one of the partially declassified images, it is possible to see what appears to be a sequence of rectangles aligned on a Venusian plateau. Independent geologists who analyzed the photo stated that it would be impossible for this type of formation to emerge spontaneously. Under those conditions, these structures raised several theories. Were they ruins of ancient buildings? Would they be highly unlikely natural formations, or perhaps remnants of some type of technological presence? In a little publicized article from the 1990s, a researcher even wrote that certain formations on Venus resemble the basic architecture of shelters or excavated installations, as if they were partially buried. The article was published for a short time and then removed due to technical review. To this day, it has never been republished. It's not just rock formations that are strange. There is also the issue of temperature. Some missions have detected what they call mobile hotspots. These are regions of the surface that, at regular intervals, emit levels of heat far above the planet's general standard, which is, in itself, extremely hot. But these thermal spikes do not occur randomly. They follow a pattern. They appear in specific places at specific times and disappear in the same way they appeared. This raised even more daring hypotheses. Were these points evidence of some underground energy activity? Are there any artificial heat sources still operating beneath the Venusian crust today? Some scientists have suggested it could be volcanic activity. Others, more daring, but also more silent, said that this was behavior incompatible with volcanoes due to the frequency of the signals. One of the engineers involved with analyzing this data from the Magellan probe wrote in an internal note, "It looks more like a type of controlled emission than a simple geological reaction." This phrase was never officially published. It was discovered years later in a leak of internal documents, and its author has since disappeared from public records. No interviews, no new publications. Silence, and it doesn't stop there. There are images that show what appear to be symmetrical tracks, as if something had moved on the surface of Venus. The trails have a pattern, they have direction, and they do not coincide with the action of the wind, since the planet's dense atmosphere, composed of carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid clouds, practically prevents common erosions like those we know on Earth. These marks resemble mats or tracks. And the question that remains in the air is straightforward. Traces of what? Or whose? There is also an internal report that circulated in specialized forums, originating from a meeting between NASA analysts in 2006. This report mentions a localized electromagnetic pulsation pattern in a specific region of the planet's southern hemisphere. This pulsation, recorded by remote sensors, had a constant rhythm, almost like a signal. At the time, they said it could be interference from solar sources. But strangely, the phenomenon was repeated during Venusian nocturnal periods, which eliminates this possibility. The case was closed and, as far as we know, never investigated again. And if all this still seems little, there is the testimony of a scientist who worked in a NASA imaging research division, who gave a rare interview to an independent channel. He said, with a trembling voice, that for years he saw photos of Venus that never reached the public. Photos with patterns he couldn't explain. He used these exact words. "We saw things that we didn't know how to classify. Structures, ... shapes, ... shadows that seemed to move from one register to another." And the most frightening thing, when we commented among colleagues, the order was clear. Don't register, don't speak, just archive. That interview was deleted from the internet less than a week later. But the most disturbing point came when he quoted a phrase heard during an internal meeting. "We cannot ignore the signs." This phrase would have been said by a senior official from the agency itself when analyzing thermal data and radar images sent by the Magellan mission. He would have warned that there was something that was not being interpreted correctly. Or perhaps it was, and that is why it was suppressed. After this speech, curiously, this scientist never made public statements again. His career ended abruptly, and his professional page was removed from the agency's website months later. Today, it is as if he never existed. So what was actually found on Venus? Where do these clues take us? Are we talking about an ancient civilization which existed even before the Earth was home to complex life? Or some form of technological presence that survived the planet's environmental collapse? Perhaps old probes that still transmit, or even artifacts that continue to operate under the planet's dense clouds. The questions are many. The answers silently hidden. And this is where you enter this story. If all this awakens in you the feeling that there is much more being hidden than revealed, comment below. I see the signs. Or if you believe that the images of Venus hide a truth that has never been told, right. The ruins are there. Every comment like this helps keep this investigation alive and bring this truth which so many want to bury to more people like you. According to NASA's official version, Venus is, by far, one of the most hostile places in the solar system. The space agency describes the planet as a true cosmic hell, an atmosphere composed almost entirely of carbon dioxide, dense clouds of sulfuric acid, and average temperatures exceeding 460 degrees Celsius, enough heat to melt lead. The pressure on its surface is 92 times greater than that of Earth, the equivalent of being more than 900 meters deep in the ocean, an environment that, according to the agency's scientists, would be absolutely incapable of supporting any type of life, be it as we know it or even in more extreme formats. According to NASA spokespeople, all the data collected over the decades only confirms the planet's catastrophic scenario. Venus, they say, is a dead world, suffocated by its own atmosphere. All the volcanic activity that may have once existed no longer manifests itself with the same intensity. There is no significant magnetic field, which means that any attempt to establish contact with the surface, even through probes, is hampered by constant exposure to solar radiation. The completed missions, as stated in the reports, were not canceled due to lack of interest, but due to technological limitations. After all, experts say, nothing survives on Venus for more than a few minutes without being completely destroyed. This is the explanation the public has heard for more than 30 years. A narrative constructed based on real data, yes, but presented in such an absolute and immutable way that any questioning automatically becomes treated as pseudoscience or unfounded theory. NASA claims that Venus is inhospitable, uninhabitable, and biologically irrelevant. And with that, it closes the door to any other interpretation. But, as always happens when it comes to space exploration, what is said officially and what is observed behind the scenes do not always go hand in hand. Because if Venus really is so dead, so toxic, and so impossible to explore, why were images from some missions edited? Which part of the files was classified as confidential? Why did certain discoveries made in the 70s simply disappear from scientific publications? And, perhaps most importantly, why didn't NASA ever come back? The answer offered always revolves around costs and the lack of scientific return. But this argument doesn't hold up for long. After all, the same agency that claims a lack of resources to return to Venus invests billions in projects to explore distant moons of Saturn, sends robots to Mars year after year, and funds ultra-advanced telescopes capable of seeing exoplanets light years from Earth. What justifies such negligence with the planet closest to us? This is where skepticism begins to speak louder. Because the absence of new missions added to the disappearance of records and the deliberate editing of images does not point to a simple lack of interest. On the contrary, it indicates that there is something there that should not be disclosed, something that doesn't fit into the constructed narrative, something that, if revealed, would call into question not only scientific conclusions, but also public opinions, trust in space institutions, And why hide something on a planet that supposedly has nothing to offer? Why was so much data archived under secrecy, even when it did not reveal any directly threatening information? Was it really just scientific bureaucracy? Or is there a deliberate policy of restricting access to information? When it goes beyond the limits of what humanity is ready to hear. This is not the first time that NASA has downplayed discoveries in the name of scientific responsibility, and it won't be the last. The case of Venus, however, seems to go beyond the control of the narrative. He seems to touch on something deeper, because the silence around the planet is not just scientific, it is almost symbolic. A planet so close and at the same time so vetoed. So similar to us and at the same time so forgotten. And even within the scientific community itself, there are those who raise doubts. Independent astrobiologists, researchers not affiliated with official institutions, and even some former NASA collaborators have already publicly expressed their discomfort with the treatment given to Venus. One of them even stated at an international congress that the absence of investigation is, in itself, evidence that something is being avoided. The speech was met with silence. And then, it was cut from the final publication of the event. The questions continue. If Venus is really a planet with nothing to offer, why so much care with its public image? Why are the answers always so evasive? And why, after decades of complete abandonment, did NASA decide now to resume interest in it? If you, who have been watching so far, also notice these gaps, also feel this discomfort in the face of the official discourse, write here in the comments. Silence says more than the answer. Or if you believe that Venus holds something that goes far beyond what we were told, comment, they didn't return for fear of what they found. These comments show that people are paying attention, people who want to understand. People like you. What if Venus was, one day, habitable? This question in itself already breaks the logic that NASA has insisted on publicly supporting for decades. But what if the issue goes even deeper? What if the signs that the planet once hosted some kind of civilization, or at least complex life forms, are being purposely hidden? Because when we connect the data, the official, the leaked, and the buried, a line of reasoning emerges that, for many, is absurd. But for others, it's simply inevitable. There is a real reason for the silence around Venus. And perhaps that reason is far more disturbing than anyone is prepared to admit. The central theory that is beginning to gain traction among independent scholars, former space agency employees, and experts in geological data is that Venus was not only habitable, but may have been the cradle of a civilization before ours. A civilization that perhaps does not have terrestrial origins. Or in another equally disturbing hypothesis, a civilization that was born right there on Venusian soil, billions of years ago, when the planet's conditions were still compatible with the existence of oceans, a balanced atmosphere, and life cycles similar to those we have here on Earth. The oldest records indicate that Venus underwent a drastic climate change. We are not talking about gradual changes, but about an environmental catastrophe of planetary proportions. Something or someone interfered with its ecosystem so aggressively that it transformed it into the inhospitable environment we know today. Traditional science calls this the runaway greenhouse effect. But there are those who say that the planet may have been artificially modified. And this is where the mystery takes on another level. Imagine that an advanced civilization, with technology beyond what we can conceive, has thrived on Venus for millennia. And that, at some point in history, something got out of control. Be it a failed experiment, a technological war, an energy collapse, or even a natural event amplified by artificial intervention. The result would have been the total collapse of Venus's biosphere. And what was left were fragments, half-buried structures, geometric patterns on the surface, and, possibly, electromagnetic signals that still persist to this day, echoing like traces of something that refused to disappear completely. Some radar anomalies captured by probes, such as Magellan, show patterns that cannot be attributed to chance. Perfect ripples on the ground, elevations with exact angles, and marks that repeat with symmetry that is impossible for nature to act alone. These anomalies have been classified as radar illusions, shadow effects, or thermal interference. But interestingly, these explanations only appear when the images are analyzed by official bodies. Independent researchers, by applying alternative filters and expanding the records, revealed details that resemble walls, corridors, domes, and even triangular structures. None of them were explained satisfactorily. And once again, when they started to attract attention, these records disappeared from public platforms. Another intriguing point is the detection of chemical compounds in the upper atmosphere of Venus that suggest biological activity. In 2020, a group of astronomers announced the presence of phosphine in the planet's atmosphere, a gas that, on Earth, is mainly produced by biological processes. The discovery was met with skepticism, revised, refuted, reaffirmed, and ... archived. NASA itself said that there is still no confirmation and that new analyses are being conducted. But to date, no definitive position has been taken, and that is, to say the least, suspicious. The presence of phosphine could indicate microbial life in the upper levels of the atmosphere, where pressure and temperature are less aggressive. If confirmed, this would mean that, even in an environment considered extreme, life found a way to persist. And where there is resistance, there is history. And where there is history, there may be memory, traces of a past that are perhaps being hidden. So as not to cause a narrative collapse, now imagine the global impact if it were officially confirmed that an advanced civilization existed on Venus. This would rewrite not only the books on astronomy, but also on history, religion, philosophy, and, most importantly, geopolitics. Because with this confirmation would come the inevitable question, are we alone? And if we're not, where? Are they now? Did they migrate? Were they destroyed? Do they remain hidden? That is why the most accepted theory among scholars of the occult and the unspoken is that the silence around Venus is strategic. It is not a question of scientific disinterest. It's a question of control. Control of information. Control of the narrative. Control of the collective perception of what is possible or not in the universe. Because admitting that Venus holds ruins, signs or artifacts from another era or from another people is opening Pandora's box. External interference also cannot be ruled out. There are records of magnetic variations and pulsed emissions coming from fixed locations on Venus. These signals were captured at specific frequencies, analyzed by radio telescopes, and discarded as noise. But if they were, in fact, noises, why? Were so many reports about them classified as restricted? Why were scientists prevented from publishing their full analyses? And more. Why were these analyses being done in the first place, if, officially, there is nothing abnormal on the planet? Everything points to a truth that many already feel, even if they can't prove it. Venus keeps secrets. And secrets, when they threaten to emerge, are buried under layers of bureaucracy, institutional skepticism, and technical silence. If you feel like something has been left behind, something buried beneath the thick clouds and suffocating atmosphere of Venus, right here in the comments. The past is on Venus. Or if you believe that this story goes far beyond science and touches on greater truths, comment, they were already there. I want to know how far your perception goes in this investigation. If they hid Venus, what else is being hidden from humanity? This question cannot be ignored. We are no longer just talking about scientific curiosity, but about something that affects our perception of reality, our history, and what we were taught as truth. What would happen if NASA or any other space agency publicly admitted that Venus was once habitable? Or worse, that there is evidence that life forms or even civilizations existed there? And why hide it? If Venus is really a dead, inhospitable, toxic planet with enough heat to destroy any current technology in a few minutes, why was so much data archived? Why were images edited? Why were documents classified? Why were scientists silenced? There's something there they don't want us to know. And this omission raises a much bigger warning. What are they doing with other discoveries? If they hid Venus, who's to say they didn't also hide information about Mars, the Moon, or even the Earth itself? This is no longer a conspiracy theory. It's a pattern of behavior, a way of operating. The way they deal with the unknown is almost always the same: denial, concealment, distraction. And the reason for this is clear. Admitting that there was, or is, life on other planets would change everything. Science, religion, politics, the way people live. It wouldn't just be a scientific discovery. It would be a cultural and social rupture. Now think, what if what happened to Venus was actually a warning? What if that violent transformation, that extreme environmental collapse, was caused by a civilization that destroyed its own planet? This puts us in an uncomfortable mirror, because we are seeing, here on Earth, the same signs accumulating. Environmental catastrophes, rampant exploitation of resources, technological wars. Venus may not just be a forgotten planet. It can be a reminder of what awaits us if we continue on the same path, and that's why silence is so dangerous. Because it not only hides the past, it prevents us from understanding the present and preparing for the future. If there is something there, something that connects our planet to theirs, then we have a right to know. What's more, we have a duty to investigate, to search, to question everything. If you also feel that this is bigger than it seems, comment here. They hid more than Venus. And if you think we are looking at a reflection of our own destiny, right? Venus is the mirror of Earth. I want to know how far your perception goes, because what comes next could change everything. If all this has left you uneasy, if you have come this far, feeling that this Venus story is much bigger, deeper, and darker than anyone dares to admit, then the time has come for you to actively participate in this investigation. Because, as unbelievable as it may seem, every question we ask, every connection we make, every piece of information we share brings us closer to what has been deliberately hidden for decades. And the more people pay attention, the harder it will be to keep this truth buried under the thick clouds of censorship. Do you really believe that Venus is just a dead planet? Or does it, as much evidence suggests, hold traces of something much older, something that completely defies everything we've been taught about the history of life in the universe? And more, why do they still insist on keeping us away from this answer? What is there on Venus that we cannot know, or rather, what exists on Venus that they need that people continue to ignore? If you have ever stopped to think that none of this is by chance, if you feel that there is a deeper truth behind the silence of space agencies, then comment here. They erased the evidence. This is the kind of phrase that helps keep the content alive, that fuels the discussion and shows that you're not just watching, you're reflecting, you're questioning, you're awake, and if you, like me, believe that Venus was just the beginning, that the entire solar system may be filled with clues to a hidden past, lost civilizations, and silenced contacts, right? The conspiracy is bigger than it seems. Your opinion down here matters much more than you realize, because when more voices come together, the further this message can reach. If this video moved you, if at any point you felt that something within this story resonated as truth, Even if the outside world tries to convince you otherwise, then this is your place. Here, we do not accept ready-made answers. Here, we investigate what's behind the silence, connect the dots they try to erase, and go deeper into the stories that really matter. If you've gotten this far, it's because you're not satisfied with the surface, and that sets you apart. Therefore, I invite you now to subscribe to the channel. Not just to follow the next videos, but to be part of a community that thinks differently, who feels there is something wrong with the official versions, who knows that the truth is closer than they imagine, but it takes courage to face it. In the next videos, we'll go even deeper, and you'll want to be here when the next truths begin to emerge.